August 12, 1935, Alhambra Ballroom, Harlem. 200 witnesses. One hired killer from Chicago. One target, Bumpy Johnson. Dutch Schultz wanted Harlem taken in a single night. By the time sirens arrived, the message had reversed. This wasn't rage or revenge, but control by design. So how did Bumpy survive, and why did Schultz never try again? To understand that night, we have to go back to the trap that set it all in motion. August 1935, Small's Paradise on Lenox Avenue. Duke Ellington bled from the phonograph speakers while outside men were breaking fingers over gambling debts, and police were counting bribe money in patrol cars 3 blocks away pretending not to see anything. Harlem was dying slow. The depression had its teeth in the neighborhood's throat and would not let go. 7 people sleeping in one-room apartments. Fathers lining up for jobs that did not exist. Mothers feeding children watered-down soup because meat cost money nobody had. At night, those same fathers lined up at basement windows betting nickels on 3-digit numbers. Not because they were stupid, because the numbers game was the only bank in Harlem that did not laugh in your face when you asked for help. Chase Manhattan would not give you a dime if you were black and poor. But the numbers runner knew your name and your kids' names, and when you hit your number, he paid you cash. That same day, no paperwork, no questions about where you lived or what color your skin was. Stephanie St. Clair ran the numbers like a warlord runs occupied territory. She was 40 years old, spoke 3 languages, and had sent 12 men to the hospital in the last 5 years for trying to take what belonged to her. The police called her a criminal. Harlem called her the woman who paid your bail when cops arrested you for walking while black. She sent cash to families when landlords threatened eviction. She had conversations with slumlords who charged colored tenants double rent for the same broken toilets and rat-infested walls that white tenants got. After those conversations, rent went down or the landlord sold his building and moved to Connecticut with his jaw wired shut. Bumpy Johnson was her enforcer. 30 years old. 5'9", 160 pounds. He did not look dangerous until you saw his eyes and understood that something inside him had gone cold a long time ago and never warmed back up. He read Langston Hughes' poetry and played chess in Washington Square Park. He could quote Shakespeare while breaking your arm in 3 places and explaining exactly why you should not have tried to steal from Stephanie St. Clair's numbers operation. 4 men were dead because they did not listen. 6 more were walking with canes or eating through straws because Bumpy had used tire irons and brass knuckles, and in one case, a claw hammer, to teach lessons about respecting territory. When Stephanie pointed at a problem, Bumpy removed it. Permanently. Dutch Schultz wanted Harlem, not the people or the culture or the music, just the money. $5,000 a week flowing through the numbers game. Dutch ran bootlegging and protection rackets from the Bronx to Yonkers, and he looked at Harlem like it was a store he could walk into and rob. He sent collectors with polite offers. Partner with us. Give Dutch 20%. We provide protection. Stephanie sent them back with broken noses and the message that Harlem already had protection and did not need white men from the Bronx taking cuts of money that kept families from starving. Dutch sent enforcers. 3 of them. Big men with baseball bats and brass knuckles who walked into a numbers parlor on 135th Street and started smashing furniture and beating the clerk behind the counter until his face looked like ground beef. They told everyone in that room that this was what happened when you said no to Dutch Schultz. They walked out laughing. Bumpy found them 6 hours later in a warehouse in the Bronx. 2 of them never walked again. The 3rd one lost his right eye to a broken bottle and spent 4 months in the hospital learning to eat solid food. Bumpy left a message carved into the warehouse wall with a knife. Harlem is not for sale. Dutch got the message. He also got angry. Men like Dutch Schultz do not accept being told no by black men in neighborhoods they consider inferior. He called Chicago. He asked for Ulysses Rollins. Rollins was a killer, not the kind who got angry and stabbed someone in a bar fight. The professional kind. The kind unions hired to walk into strike meetings and shoot 3 organizers in the head while 100 witnesses suddenly developed amnesia. 6'2", 240 pounds. 11 confirmed dead by age 25, which meant the real number was probably closer to 20. Rollins killed people the way accountants filed taxes. Methodically, without emotion, For money. Dutch offered $5,000 upfront and $10,000 when Bumpy Johnson stopped breathing. One condition: do it public. Do it in front of enough people that Harlem got the message. Defying Dutch Schultz meant dying in front of your own community while they watched and understood they were next if they did not fall in line. Rollins took the job. He got on a train to New York. He checked into the Teresa Hotel on 125th Street under a fake name. He walked Harlem for 2 days watching Bumpy's routine. Where he ate, where he drank, who he talked to. Rollins was methodical. He did not rush. He planned. He waited. He chose the moment that would send the clearest message. Bumpy knew Rollins was in Harlem within 6 hours of him stepping off the train. The shoeshine boy outside the Teresa saw him. The woman selling flowers on the corner saw him. The elevator operator knew what floor he stayed on and what time he left for meals. Information moved through Harlem faster than police cars because information kept you alive. Stephanie St. Clair sat across from Bumpy in the back room of Small's Paradise 3 days before August 12th. A bottle of whiskey sat between them. Neither of them had touched it. Dutch sent someone from Chicago. Professional. 11 bodies. I know his name. Ulysses Rollins. Worked for the Teamsters in Detroit. Shot 3 union organizers in a meeting hall. Nobody testified. So what do? Run, hide, leave town until this blows over. Bumpy lit a cigarette. The match flared and died. I invited him to dinner. Stephanie went very still. You what? Alhambra Ballroom, August 12th, 8:30. I sent word through the hotel clerk. Told Rollins if he wants to finish his job, I will be sitting at table 7 eating spaghetti. He can walk in anytime he likes. That is suicide. No, that is strategy. Dutch wants to scare Harlem. He wants us to see one of our own killed in public so we understand resistance is fatal. I am going to give him his public killing. But the body on the floor is not going to be mine. And when it is over, Dutch is going to understand that Harlem costs more than any profit is worth. You are betting your life that you are faster than a professional killer from Chicago. I am betting my life that I understand the room better than he does. Rollins is good at killing. I am good at controlling space. In a crowded restaurant with 200 witnesses, the man who controls the panic controls who lives and who dies. Rollins thinks he is walking into an execution. He is walking into a demonstration. Stephanie poured 2 fingers of whiskey and slid 1 glass to Bumpy. If you die, I am going to be very angry with you. If I die, you will have bigger problems than being angry. Dutch will own Harlem by the end of the month, so I am not going to die. I am going to teach Dutch Schultz that there are neighborhoods in this city you cannot buy and people you cannot threaten and lines you do not cross unless you are prepared to lose everything. Bumpy stood and walked to the window. Outside, Harlem moved through its August heat. Kids playing in the spray of fire hydrants, women sitting on stoops trying to catch a breeze, men standing on corners talking about nothing because talking about nothing was better than thinking about how bad everything was. This was his neighborhood. These were his people. And somewhere in a hotel room 6 blocks away, a man from Chicago was sharpening a knife or loading a gun and planning how to kill Bumpy Johnson in front of enough witnesses to terrify an entire community into submission. 4 days from now, one of them would be dead. The other would be a legend. Bumpy intended to make sure he was the legend, and Rollins was the lesson that got repeated in every bar and barbershop and Union Hall from Harlem to Chicago until every gangster in America understood that some neighborhoods fight back and some men do not scare. Dutch Schultz sat in his Bronx office counting bodies and counting money and understanding they were connected in ways that made his jaw clench tight enough to crack teeth. 3 men sent to Harlem, 1 in a wheelchair, 1 eating through a tube, 1 in the ground with his family lying to neighbors about him moving to Philadelphia. Each failure cost Dutch money and respect. Money could be replaced, respect could not. In the back rooms where men in expensive suits carved up territory like generals dividing a map, Dutch heard whispers. Whispers that he could not control Harlem. Whispers that a black man half his size was making him look weak. Whispers got men killed. Not the men whispering. The men being whispered about. Dutch made his decision. If Harlem would not fear him, he would import fear from somewhere else. He called Chicago. He asked for Ulysses Rollins. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. I need someone dead. Public. In front of enough people that the whole neighborhood understands what happens when they disrespect me. Who? Bumpy Johnson runs enforcement for the numbers game in Harlem. I know the name. He put 3 of your men in the hospital. That is why I am calling you. How much? 5,000 up front. 10,000 when he stops breathing. It has to be public. It has to be loud. I need Harlem to see it. Rollins was quiet for 10 seconds. Public means witnesses. Witnesses mean risk. 20,000 total. Done. This week. It happens when I say it happens. I plan, I wait, I execute. You will read about it in the papers when I am finished. $20,000 was a fortune. But $20,000 to solve the problem permanently and send a message that would keep every neighborhood quiet for the next decade was cheap. Harlem would learn that defying Dutch Schultz meant dying in front of your own people. Rollins arrived in New York 3 days later. He checked into the Teresa Hotel under a fake name. He spent 2 days walking Harlem watching Bumpy's routine. Where he ate, where he played chess, who he talked to. Rollins was methodical. He took notes. He memorized faces and exits. He did not believe in luck. He believed in preparation. Bumpy knew Rollins was in town within 6 hours. The shoeshine boy outside the Teresa saw him. The flower seller saw him ask directions. The elevator operator heard him asking about restaurants. By nightfall, Bumpy had his room number, his fake name, and a list of everywhere he had been. Information was the first weapon. Guns came later. Bumpy sat in Small's paradise with Stephanie and 2 collectors. On the table was a map with red marks showing everywhere Rollins had been. He is watching me, learning patterns. He moves in the next 72 hours. So hide, leave town, let this blow over. No, I give him what he wants. A public meeting, but I choose the location and I control the room. Where? Alhambra Ballroom, August 12th. Dinner service, 200 people, families, musicians. The collector leaned forward. You are inviting him to kill you in front of 200 witnesses. I am inviting him to try. Rollins is good at killing in empty warehouses. I am good at controlling crowds. In a room full of people, the man who keeps them calm controls who lives and who dies. Stephanie poured whiskey. This is either brilliant or suicidal. It is both. Dutch wants Harlem terrified. I am going to give him a spectacle, but the lesson will not be the one he paid for. Bumpy laid photographs on the table. Angles of Alhambra, tables, exits, sightlines. I need table 7, back to the corner. I can see the door. I need families with children at tables 2, 4, and 9. I need the band playing loud. I need exits clear but not obvious. For 3 days, Bumpy prepared. He walked Alhambra measuring distances. Table 7 to the door. Table 7 to the kitchen. Table 7 to the nearest children. In a crowded restaurant, violence spreads like fire. One scream and everyone runs and people die in the panic. Bumpy needed control. He needed the room still long enough to finish what needed finishing. He ran scenarios. If Rollins came shooting, Bumpy needed to drop him before the second shot. If Rollins came with a knife, Bumpy needed to close distance before Rollins chose targets. The first 3 seconds decided everything. After 3 seconds, people would move. After 5 seconds, the room would explode. The night before August 12th, Stephanie's man brought a bottle in brown paper. Barolo, 1934. The cork cracked when Bumpy pulled it. The wine smelled like wet wood and old leather. Bumpy poured 1 glass, took 1 sip, and set it down. Tomorrow he needed his head clearer than wine allowed. August 11th, Bumpy walked into a church on 152nd Street. Empty and cold despite August heat. His footsteps echoed off stone. He sat in the back pew and thought about probability. Rollins was professional. Bumpy was good but not professional. Rollins had 11 kills. Bumpy had 4. In a straight fight, Rollins probably won. But this would not be straight. This would be theater. And in theater, whoever controlled the audience controlled the outcome. That afternoon, Bumpy got information that changed everything. A white woman had made reservations at Alhambra for August 12th. Helen Lawson, film critic from Manhattan, writing about Harlem culture. She had no idea she was walking into an execution. Bumpy understood immediately. If the room turned into a massacre, Helen would write about savagery and violence. She would turn Harlem into a jungle. But if Bumpy controlled the room, kept it surgical and quick, she would write about precision, about a man defending his neighborhood without burning it. Bumpy stood in the church. Tomorrow night, I do not just survive. I make everyone in that room understand who controls it. He walked into the August heat. The sun was setting. Kids playing, women on stoops, men smoking on corners. In 24 hours, some of them would sit in Alhambra watching Bumpy Johnson become a legend or a warning. No middle ground, only before and after. After tomorrow night, Dutch Schultz would understand that Harlem was not for sale at any price. Alhambra ballroom was packed. 200 people at tables covered in white cloth. Wine glasses caught candlelight. The air smelled like garlic and tomato sauce and expensive perfume. A 4-piece band played soft enough that people could talk. Anniversary dinners, birthday celebrations, the kind of night you saved for all year. Helen Lawson sat across from Bumpy at table 7 with a notebook open. She was 32 film critic for the Manhattan Herald here to write about Harlem culture. Bumpy had called 3 days earlier with a polite dinner invitation. She thought it was strange, but strange made good copy. Bumpy wore charcoal and a tie the color of dried wine. He sat with his back to the corner, watching the door and every exit. For 20 minutes he had been talking about Langston Hughes and poetry. Helen was writing everything down, thinking this would make a beautiful column. "You read poetry?" Helen asked. "Every night. Hughes, County Cullen, Shakespeare when I want to remember that violence has always had language worth preserving." Strange for someone in your profession. My profession is keeping order where the law will not. Poetry reminds me that order and brutality are not the same. Helen smiled and wrote it down. She had no idea she was sitting across from a man who had killed 4 people and was preparing to kill a 5th in 3 minutes. 8:47 p.m. The front door opened. The band was mid-song. Conversations hummed. A waiter carried pasta toward table 12. A child laughed at table 4. Normal. Safe. The last second before everything changed. Ulysses Rollins stepped through the door and conversations within 10 feet stopped. Men who have killed 11 people carry it in their shoulders and eyes. 6'2", 240 pounds. Gray suit. His eyes went straight to table 7. He walked through the room like he owned it. Conversations died. Forks stopped. The child stopped laughing. 200 people understood something was about to happen. Bumpy did not move. Hands on the table. Left near his water glass. Right resting on white cloth. Helen looked up and went pale. Rollins stopped 3 feet from the table. "Dutch Schultz sends his regards. Harlem belongs to him now." "You said no, so here I am." Bumpy looked at him like a stain about to be painted over. "Dutch does not own Harlem. He never will. You can go back to Chicago, or you can try to finish what he paid for. Either way, someone leaves in a bag." "It will not be me. Everyone thinks that. Right up until it is." Rollins reached inside his jacket, slow, hand going toward his shoulder. The room understood. Helen gasped. A woman grabbed her child. Panic was 3 seconds away. Bumpy moved first, not toward Rollins's face, toward his right forearm as the hand pulled the gun. Bumpy had a knife, 4 inches, sharp. The blade went into Rollins's forearm between the bones. Rollins's hand opened. The gun fell without firing. The room stayed frozen. They watched because this was not chaos. This was surgery. Bumpy pulled the knife and slashed across Rollins's left cheek, opening skin ear to jaw. Rollins swung his left hand. Bumpy stepped inside and put the knife into Rollins's left thigh above the knee. Deep. Rollins dropped to one knee. The band stopped. Silence except for Rollins breathing hard. Bumpy stepped behind him and put the knife against his throat. Not cutting, just resting there. "You came to make an example of me," Bumpy said quietly, but everyone heard. "You were supposed to kill me so my people would fear Dutch. But you made a mistake. You walked into a room you did not control. You thought 200 witnesses meant people too scared to help. What it meant was 200 people watching you lose." Rollins tried to speak, but Bumpy moved the knife. "I am letting you live. Not mercy. I need you to go back to Dutch and tell him what happened. Tell him Harlem is not for sale. Tell him the next man he sends will not leave at all. But he will not send you. Because after tonight, you are finished." Bumpy pulled the knife from Rollins's throat and drove it into his right eye. Rollins screamed, high and raw. He fell forward. Red poured from the empty socket and spread across white tablecloth and dripped onto floor. Helen vomited onto her notebook. A woman fainted. The child started crying. Bumpy walked to the bar. He picked up a white napkin and cleaned the knife slowly 3 times until nothing remained. He folded the napkin. He walked back to table 7 and sat down. Rollins was on the floor making sounds that were not words. No one helped. No one called police. They watched. Bumpy looked at Helen. Her face was white. "You came to write about Harlem. Now you have something. You can call this savagery. But what it is a message. Harlem does not belong to Dutch Schultz. It belongs to the people who live here. Anyone who tries to take it learns what you just learned. We fight back." Helen grabbed her bag and ran. Half the room watched her go. The other half watched Rollins bleeding. Bumpy raised his hand. The waiter brought the pasta tray to table 7. Spaghetti and meatballs, extra sauce. 200 people watched Bumpy Johnson eat dinner 3 feet from a man missing an eye bleeding on the floor. What they had seen was not just violence, it was control. One man had walked in planning murder and learned that in Harlem, the man who controls the panic controls everything. Bumpy ate slowly, chewed carefully. Did not look at Rollins. Did not look at the crowd. He ate like he was alone having quiet dinner. The band started playing. Conversations resumed. Forks moved. The room came back to life around a man eating pasta and another bleeding. Police arrived 15 minutes later. Bumpy was gone. So was the knife. Most witnesses were gone. The ones who stayed said they saw nothing. Just heard screaming. When they looked up, a man was bleeding and another was eating. No, they did not know who stabbed him. No, they did not see where he went. Rollins survived, lost the eye, went back to Chicago 3 weeks later, never took another job, never spoke about Alhambra, but the story spread. Dutch heard it. Every gangster from Bronx to Brooklyn heard it. Bumpy Johnson had taken a professional killer and turned him into a one-eyed warning in front of 200 witnesses. The message was clear. Harlem was not for sale. The room was a bomb waiting for someone to light the fuse. 200 people packed between tables and exits. One scream and the whole place would stampede. Children would get crushed. Women would get trampled. Someone would pull a gun and police would show up shooting anything that moved. By morning, newspapers would scream about Harlem savagery and the whole neighborhood would burn. Helen Lawson was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She understood now. This was never dinner. This was an execution with white tablecloths. She was supposed to witness it and write about animals in Harlem. Except the story was not going the way anyone planned. Rollins was on one knee with red pouring from his eye socket. 240 pounds of muscle and rage. Even half blind, he could still kill. One wild grab and he would get the child at table 4 or the old woman at table 9 and the room would explode. Bumpy did not give him time. He stepped behind Rollins and drove the knife into the back of his left shoulder, cutting through muscle and tendon until the arm hung useless. Then the right shoulder. Rollins tried to swing, but both arms were dead weight. Bumpy knelt and cut both hamstrings. Quick, surgical. Rollins collapsed forward. He tried to push up, but nothing worked. He could only lie there, making sounds like an animal bleeding in a trap. "You came here to make Harlem afraid," Bumpy said quietly, but everyone heard. "You were supposed to kill me so my people would understand that saying no to Dutch Schultz gets you killed. But you made a mistake. You thought 200 witnesses meant people too scared to stop you. What it meant was 200 people watching you learn that Harlem does not kneel." Rollins tried to speak, but only red came out where he had bitten through his tongue. Bumpy walked to table 6 and picked up a clean napkin. He wiped the knife blade slowly, 3 strokes from hilt to tip until nothing remained. He folded the napkin into a perfect square. He straightened his tie. He buttoned his jacket. He stepped over Rollins without looking down. He walked back to table 7 and sat down. He looked at the waiter frozen against the wall. "I would like my dinner now." The waiter's eyes were wide, but his feet moved. He disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a plate. Spaghetti and meatballs. Extra sauce. His hands shook so badly the plate rattled when he set it down. "Thank you," Bumpy said. Bumpy picked up his fork and twirled pasta like he was sitting alone on a Tuesday night. He brought it to his mouth, chewed slowly, took a sip of water, cut a meatball in half. The entire room watched. 200 people in silence watching a man eat dinner 3 feet from another man bleeding out. The band started playing. Piano first, then saxophone, then drums. The music gave people permission to move. Conversations started in whispers. Forks scraped plates. Wine was poured. The room came back to life following the rhythm Bumpy had set. Rollins was still on the floor. His sounds were getting quieter. Red was everywhere. A waiter brought towels and laid them around the body so customers would not step in it. This was Alhambra. They had standards, outside sirens, getting closer. Bumpy did not look up. Another bite, chewed, swallowed. Water. He was not rushing. He was making a point. This room belonged to him. A man from Chicago with $20,000 and a reputation did not change that. Helen was writing again. Fast, trying to capture everything. She had come to write about culture. Instead, she was writing about a man who had taken apart a professional killer without letting 200 people panic and die. Bumpy finished his pasta, set his fork down, dabbed his mouth, stood up and put 2 tens on the table. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward the kitchen exit. Before he left, he turned and looked at the room. "Go home. Finish your meals. This is your neighborhood. What happened here tonight was one man learning that Harlem is not for sale. Tell that story. Make sure they understand. We do not kneel." Then he was gone. Through the kitchen, out the back, into the alley. By the time police walked through the front door, Bumpy was 6 blocks away. Police found Rollins in a pool that had spread to 3 tables. They found 200 witnesses who could not remember what happened. Just heard screaming. No, they did not see who stabbed him. No, they did not know where anyone went. Rollins survived. Lost the eye. Lost most function in his left arm. Both legs never worked right. He went back to Chicago 3 weeks later. Never took another job. Never spoke about Alhambra. But the story spread. What people remembered was not the cuts. It was the spaghetti. The image of a man so in control he could dismantle a killer and then sit down to eat. That image traveled through every neighborhood where gangsters made decisions about territory and money. Dutch Schultz heard it in the Bronx. He heard his 20,000 bought him a one-eyed cripple and a story that made him look weak. He heard Harlem was laughing. Dutch never tried Harlem again. 6 months later, he was shot dead in Newark by people who decided he was more trouble than worth. Bumpy Johnson ran Harlem for 30 more years, the shadow everyone knew and no one crossed. and everyone understood that the reason they could walk their streets was because one night in August 1935, a man sat down to eat dinner and sent a message that echoed for decades. Harlem was not for sale. Anyone who tried to buy it would pay a price higher than any profit was worth. Police arrived at Alhambra 40 minutes after the ambulance left. They walked slow, asked few questions, wrote even less in their notebooks. The sergeant in charge was a 30-year veteran who knew exactly which neighborhoods paid envelopes and which ones did not. Harlem paid. That meant certain things did not get investigated too hard. The report would say self-defense. Victim pulled a weapon first. Multiple witnesses confirmed. Case closed. 3 paragraphs typed on a form that would sit in a filing cabinet for 6 months before someone threw it away to make room for newer reports about newer violence. The system wanted this to disappear. One less problem. One less headline. One less reason for people downtown to ask questions about why Harlem had its own rules and why police let it happen. But Harlem did not live by police reports. Harlem lived by stories told in barbershops, in beauty parlors, and church basements and kitchens on the 5th floor of walk-ups with no elevator. By sunrise, the story was everywhere. Not the version the police wrote. The real version. The one 200 people had watched happen. At Red's barbershop on 135th Street, men getting shaves were hearing about it before the barber finished the first pass with the straight razor. Bumpy took apart a killer from Chicago with a knife, put him on the floor, then sat down and ordered spaghetti. Ate it slow, like nothing happened. How many cuts? Does not matter. What matters is he ate dinner after. That is the part you remember. In the kitchen of a tenement on 142nd Street, 3 women were making breakfast and talking over the sound of bacon in the pan. My cousin was there. She said Bumpy stood up calm as Sunday morning, cut the man down like he was trimming a tree. No shouting, no wild swinging, just quick and done. Police come. After, long after. By then Bumpy was gone and nobody saw nothing. Good. That man from Chicago got what he came for. Just was not what he expected. The story spread, block by block, building by building, person by person. Each telling added a detail or changed a detail, but the core stayed the same. Bumpy Johnson had been marked for death by Dutch Schultz. Dutch sent a professional. The professional lost. Harlem won. And most important, Harlem stayed calm. No riot, no stampede, no children crushed in a panic. Bumpy had kept control, and that control had kept people alive. By noon, the story reached the Bronx. Dutch Schultz sat in his office with 3 men who handled his numbers and bootlegging operations. A phone call had come in an hour earlier from the hospital. Rollins was alive but finished. Lost the eye. Lost the arm. Lost both legs. Would never work again. $20,000 for a cripple and a story that made Dutch look weak. He failed, one of the men said. He did not fail, Dutch said. His jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. He walked into a trap. Bumpy set the location. Bumpy controlled the crowd. Rollins never had a chance because the fight was rigged before it started. So what do? Nothing. We do nothing. Sending another man into Harlem just gives them another body to stack. Bumpy proved his point. He proved it in front of 200 witnesses who will tell that story for the rest of their lives. Every gangster from here to Chicago will hear about it. They will hear that Dutch Schultz sent his best and Bumpy Johnson ate spaghetti over the body. That is not a fight we win. That is a quagmire that costs more than any profit is worth. One of the men leaned forward. So we just let them keep the numbers game. We let them keep Harlem, all of it, and we make our money somewhere else. Because the only thing worse than losing is losing twice. And if we go back into Harlem now, we lose twice. Dutch never tried Harlem again. 6 months later, he was shot in a restaurant in Newark. The official story said robbery. The real story was that men who make too much noise and lose too many fights become liabilities. Liabilities get removed. In Chicago, a woman named Sarah Rollins opened her mail and found a telegram from Harlem Hospital. Her son Ulysses was alive but injured. Serious injuries. She should come to New York if possible. The telegram did not say what happened. It did not mention a restaurant or a fight or a man named Bumpy Johnson. It just said injured and serious, and come soon. Sarah sat at her kitchen table holding the telegram. Her son had left Chicago 3 weeks ago saying he had a job in New York. "Good money. Be back in a week." She did not ask what kind of job paid that well. She knew better than to ask. Her son had been doing that kind of work since he was 17. She prayed every night that he would stop, that he would find something else, that he would come home safe. Now he was in a hospital, and the telegram said serious, and she knew what that meant. It meant her son had met someone who was better at the work than he was. Sarah's grandson was 5 years old. He sat at the table eating cereal and asking when Grandpa was coming home. Sarah did not have an answer. She did not know if Ulysses would ever come home, or if he would spend the rest of his life in a hospital bed, learning to live without an eye and an arm and the use of his legs. She did not know that her son had been sent to kill a man in front of 200 people as a lesson about respect and territory. She just knew that the man who left Chicago was not the man who would come back. Helen Lawson sat in her apartment in Manhattan with 10 pages of notes and a deadline in 6 hours. She had a story, the best story she had ever gotten. A story about violence and control and a man who had kept 200 people alive by staying calm while dismantling a professional killer. But she also had a choice. She could write the story the way her editor wanted. Harlem savagery, gangster violence, proof that the neighborhood was dangerous and needed more police and stricter laws. Or she could write the truth, that what happened at Alhambra was not chaos. It was order. Brutal order. But order nonetheless. Helen understood something sitting at her typewriter that morning. The power of a story was not in whether it was true or false. The power was in who got to tell it and why. If she wrote savagery, Harlem became a problem that needed solving by people who did not live there and did not understand it. If she wrote control, Harlem became a place that governed itself when the official government walked away. She made her choice. She wrote the truth. Her editor killed the story. It never ran. But Helen kept the pages. 30 years later, she would publish them in a book about the Harlem Renaissance. By then, Bumpy Johnson was dead and Dutch Schultz was a footnote in history books. But the story remained. The night a man sat down to eat spaghetti and taught an entire city that some neighborhoods do not kneel. Dutch Schultz sat in his office the morning after Alhambra and threw a whiskey glass against the wall, hard enough to shatter it into pieces that spread across the floor like diamonds. $20,000. A professional from Chicago. 200 witnesses. And the only thing Dutch bought was a story that made him look weak in front of every gangster from the Bronx to Philadelphia. But Dutch was a businessman before he was a brawler. He understood profit and loss. He understood that some fights cost more than winning is worth. Harlem had become a meat grinder. Every man Dutch sent in came back broken or did not come back at all. Continuing meant war. War meant bodies. Bodies meant police attention. Police attention meant federal investigators asking questions about bootlegging and tax evasion and all the other things Dutch had been getting away with because he kept his violence quiet and his bribes regular. Dutch made his decision. Harlem belonged to Stephanie Saint, Claire and Bumpy Johnson. Anyone who wanted it could try to take it. Dutch was done bleeding money and men for a neighborhood that refused to kneel. 6 months later, Dutch was shot dead in a restaurant in Newark. The official story said robbery. The real story was that men who make too much noise and lose too many fights become problems. Problems get solved with bullets. Dutch Schultz learned what Ulysses Rollins learned. Some lessons come too late to matter. Bumpy Johnson became the shadow that controlled Harlem for the next 30 years. He did not run for office. He did not give speeches. He did not put his name on buildings. But everyone in Harlem knew that if you had a problem, the law would not solve. Bumpy solved it. If a landlord was charging illegal rent, Bumpy had a conversation with him and the rent went down. If someone was selling drugs to children, Bumpy made sure they stopped or disappeared. He kept order not with speeches or laws, but with the understanding that some neighborhoods govern themselves when the official government walks away. Stephanie St. Clair ran the numbers game until the day she died. The city called her a criminal. Harlem called her the bank that never closed. She paid bail. She fed families. She kept the neighborhood alive when the Depression was trying to kill it. History would forget her name, but the people who lived in Harlem in the 30s and 40s never did. Helen Lawson carried two truths in her head for the rest of her life. One truth was the man who quoted Langston Hughes over dinner. The other truth was the man who turned a restaurant into an operating table without letting 200 people panic and die. She never published her story about that night. Her editor killed it. But she kept the pages. Years later, she would write that some neighborhoods survive because they have men willing to do what governments will not. She did not say if that was good or bad. She just said it was true. Ulysses Rollins went back to Chicago and disappeared. Some said he drank himself to death in a basement apartment on the South Side. Some said the Teamsters put him down quiet because a one-eyed cripple reminded everyone that even professionals lose sometimes. What was certain was that after August 1935, no one ever hired him again. The man who had 11 kills became a cautionary tale told in union halls and back rooms. Do not take a job in Harlem. Do not go after Bumpy Johnson. Do not assume 200 witnesses means easy money. After that night, the Italians who ran organized crime in New York spoke about Harlem in whispers. They did not say Bumpy's name in front of strangers. They did not make plans to take the numbers game. They understood that some territories cost more than any profit justifies. When Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, his funeral had a line of cars 3 blocks long. Some of those cars carried flowers with no names on the cards. Everyone knew where they came from. Respect from men who had learned the lesson and never forgot it. The lesson was simple. Real power does not come from violence. It comes from intelligence and the ability to stay calm when everyone else wants you to lose control. Bumpy had walked into a room with 200 people and one professional killer and kept everyone alive except the one who came to kill him. That was not luck. That was mastery. Mastery of violence. Mastery of fear. Mastery of the space between panic and order where one man with steady hands can decide who lives and who dies. Harlem did not need permission to exist. Harlem set its own boundaries, and anyone who crossed those boundaries learned the price. Dutch Schultz wanted to buy Harlem with money and fear. Bumpy Johnson answered with something more valuable. Control. Not control through terror, but control through competence. The ability to dismantle a threat without letting innocent people die in the process. From that night forward, Harlem was not merchandise to be negotiated over. It was a neighborhood that had proven it would fight back. Not with riots or chaos or random violence, but with precision and patience and men who understood that the goal was not to win the fight. The goal was to make sure the fight never needed to happen again. Dutch wanted to scare Harlem into submission. Instead, he taught Harlem that outside threats could be handled. Bumpy wanted to protect his neighborhood. Instead, he created a legend that lasted generations, and everyone who heard the story understood the same thing. Some places cannot be bought, some people cannot be broken, and some nights in August change everything that comes after. This story is shared for historical insight and personal reflection, not to promote violence or illegal behavior. Thank you for watching to the end. If this story made you think differently about power and patience, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us next time because the next story goes even deeper.